What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a great day as always. Today, as you can see by the view behind me, we got some work to do on the 2008 Jeep Wrangler. So my wiring to the battery, to the alternator, all of those main wires is an absolute mess. It has to get swapped out with the upgraded Jeep cables kit. So this is their Big 7 upgrade, and this is all of the wires you're going to need, all of the main wires for the battery, alternator, grounds, all of that stuff. And the really cool thing about this kit is every end is labeled. This one, for example, PDC. Swap over to the other end, this one's labeled fuse. So these all will be super simple to install. They tell you exactly where they go. They also came with the new clamps for the terminals, which will be super nice because it's actually the correct ones for this type of end. Came with the fuse setup. Then it came with the covers for the actual terminals themselves and a ton of stickers. So let's go ahead and get one of these stickers tossed onto the Yeti, then we'll get this install going. Right about there. So to get started, I'm actually just going to go ahead and disconnect the battery and get all of this stuff just torn out so that way we have room for all of the new wires. Let's get this all disconnected. This is just a huge mess all around. To give you guys an idea, this is the new wire next to the old wire. This is a huge upgrade, way thicker wire. This will make everything a lot easier on the Jeep. So I've gone ahead and got both of the clamps on the terminals removed. We're going to clean this stuff up, install the new clamps, and get that all set up. I'm going to clean everything along the way. That way we know we have great connections the entire way through. All right, we're going to start with all of the negatives first, then we'll move over to the positives. So I'm going to go ahead and do the wire that goes from the fender right down in here as the ground up until the battery. So let's go ahead and get that pulled out. So most of the easy stuff is already hooked up. However, we are now on to the part that sucks. So this cable here has to go down to the starter, way down in there, routed up and around the back of the engine, I believe, and then over to the battery post. So we got to figure out how to get this one down in there cleanly. We got to make sure we can get it around the exhaust. We got to get it behind the heat shield on the starter and figure out how to hold it down there. The big issue is that these thick wires don't really make bends nearly as easily as these old wires. A lot of the old wires also had these bent end pieces here, so that way it was pretty much already bent. None of the thicker new ones have that. So we're going to go ahead and have to figure out how to bend that around. But this definitely has to be tucked in that heat shield down there with the starter, so it doesn't get too close to the exhaust and get too hot and melt or anything like that. Then these two negatives right here actually go on the engine block to the firewall, and then I believe engine block to the battery terminal. Now the part that sucks is the engine block bolt that these all connect to is behind that heat shield that's behind the exhaust. So I'm gonna probably have to take that heat shield off and hope that I have enough room to get these on. But besides those two, everything else is very straightforward. Pretty much you got the alternator wire, the PDC set up here. We actually had two wires there and we had to trim the box for that so that way we could close it with those two wires in there. And besides that, everything else is extremely straightforward. Just these three wires sort of suck a little bit. They're doable and not that bad. It's just, the worst three out of the bunch. I've also got to figure out where I want to mount this fuse at. I think what I'm going to do first is clean up all the rest of the wiring, get all this junk out of here that we're replacing, and then we'll figure out where to mount that. If anything, I'm thinking right on the side of that plastic there, I think would be the easiest to access at least. But besides that, I think we are almost complete with this install. We'll just have to connect everything to the battery. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the starter. So the best way I found to get this installed was to actually remove the starter altogether, get that heat shield taken off. That's why I had to remove this, is the heat shield is pretty hard to get off unless you remove the starter. With all that removed though, it's really easy to get this all set up. All you gotta do is disconnect the old wire, hook up the new one, and then figure out which way you want to bend it around, and then put the heat shield back on over top of it and bolt it right back up to the Jeep. Pretty straightforward once you have the starter off. I'd honestly say that'll save you a ton of time just taking it off altogether. Now on to the final two grounds. All we have to do is remove this heat shield. There's a couple of nuts and bolts holding this on. You're going to want to go ahead and remove this one along with the other ones that hold on the heat shield. Just use a swivel socket and some extensions with the ratchet, and it's super easy to get off. It takes 5 minutes if that. Now all we have to do is figure out how to kind of shimmy that down and get the shield out of the way. All right, so with the heat shield disconnected and taken out, we have plenty of room to access these grounds. There's actually a ton of room back there from, if you're looking under the Jeep, looking behind the exhaust, plenty of room back there to get these off and swapped out. Now, my plan is actually to only run one wire to the engine block. It says to run two, but instead I'm going to connect both of them to the same stud on the firewall. I think that will work plenty well, and that will make this install a lot easier and a lot cleaner than running two wires down there. All right, so everything is connected. The battery's in, the fuse is in. I'll show you where I put that in just a second. The only wire we still have to do, which we're gonna have to wait a couple days to do because they're gonna have to send one out, is this alternator ground. They were actually unaware that my Jeep had one of these, so they're just gonna need the measurements from me and they'll send me out a ground for that. Not a huge deal though. This one will work perfectly fine, honestly. So I got the fuse tucked up back here. That's honestly the cleanest spot I could find to mount it. All right, so I started the Jeep and actually brought it outside so there's a little bit better lighting and I can show you guys more little details and all that kind of stuff with a better view. Much better than in the garage. It was a little dark in there to record. All right, so for starters, we did the negatives first, most of them first, honestly. So we got one that goes straight to the fender here, up to the battery terminal. That one was honestly the easiest connection ever. All you have to do is loosen that one nut. Next, we have a ground that goes, both grounds actually go to the stud on the firewall. One end of that goes down to the engine block and the other end comes up here, wraps around and touches the battery terminal. I thought that was the cleanest and easiest way to install this, and that's actually how it came from the factory. So it wasn't too bad. Now, like I said earlier, this wire right here is going to end up getting replaced. I just have to send them over measurements and they'll send me out that wire. They were unaware that my Jeep actually had that wire. All right, so now we have all the positives. So this one I just wrapped around the back into the fuse right there. That's where we ended up mounting the fuse. Cleanest and easiest spot I could find. Then that goes into the PDC, then out on the other side up to the battery terminal. Easiest way I could figure out how to install that, honestly, and cleanest. Then we have a wire going from the battery terminal down to the starter. Around the back, one thing to keep in mind is you want to make sure not to hit the exhaust with that and kind of keep it tucked away to where it's not going to get way too hot. Now, one thing to keep in mind if you guys are actually installing this for yourself is this fuse location, you're going to have to go ahead and trim up this plastic a little bit. Now, the reason I put this there is because it's easiest to access, and this wire that goes to the PDC is not very long, so it's actually really tight right there, and that's kind of the only location that you can cleanly install it and still have it connect from the alternator. So that's where we went ahead and put it. Just keep in mind you're going to have to trim a little bit if that's where you want to put yours as well. Now that I have gone ahead and got this full install complete, I will say I definitely think it's worth it. And my thought here is, even without the upgrades of having a thicker gauge wire, this Jeep's from 2008. It was definitely long overdue to go through and clean up all the wiring and make sure all the wires are in good condition, connections are good, which I hadn't done until this point, so it was definitely necessary. Now, if you guys have been considering picking up a kit for yourself, I will go ahead and link them down below in the description so you guys can check them out. They make them for all kinds of different Jeeps, Grand Cherokees, Wranglers, all of them basically. So definitely go check them out. But that basically wraps up this install. Finally complete, and it's really nice to have great connections again. Less issues starting. This Jeep was having a ton of issues prior to this install, so I'm really glad I had a chance to go through and clean everything up. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching the videos. Thanks for subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.